All right, so what I've done here is painstakingly taken apart the 1980s Super Lobo RC car that you could get at Sears or Radio Shack. It is made by Nikko, and as I've said back then, the cars were hobby quality or near hobby. And what I wanted to do was show you the gearing and the differential gear. However, unlike some of the other cars, this one, the differential gear setup is riveted together, so I can't take it apart. But I can show you a little bit of it, and I can show you I can show you pictures of a differential gear setup, and then you can understand what's inside this. So first I'm going to show you, this is the motor, and you can see it's pretty big. Well, you may not realize that, but for an RC car, this is a 540 motor. This is considered a big gear. And this is the pinion gear. It's metal. And what that does is then that spins this gear here. So this is the other side of the housing. So the pinion gear, okay, is going to be set. The motor housing is going to come here, and the pinion gear is going to be here, and it's going to spin the large gear. So what you have is you have a small gear turning a large gear. And if you think about your bicycle, like a 10-speed or 21-speed, when you have the front gear where your crankshaft is, all right, which is your motor, right? Your legs are your motor, it's your crankshaft. When that's a small gear, and you have that going to a large gear in the back, that's the lowest gear. So let's say you have it in gear 1. So you have a small gear turning the largest gear in the back. That gives you the most torque. So that makes it much easier to go up hills, but you have to pedal a lot, right, to get speed. So you can't really go that fast. And so the larger the front gear, so let's say you shift that front gear from the small one, where the crankshaft is, to the largest gear, so there might be 3, and then in the back, the shifter takes it to the smallest gear in the back on the wheel. Now you're at, let's say, speed 21, and it's the hardest to pedal, but you don't have to turn the crank as many times to turn the wheel more times. So it takes more torque to spin the crank, but the result is the back wheel makes more revolutions for each crank, thus creating greater speed. So that's why 21 gear, when you have it in gear 21 speed, it is going to be the fastest, but it takes the most effort if you were to just say start pedaling at that gear. So if that's why you go through the gears. You might start at gear 3 and then work your way up, skipping some gears along the way. And then once you're going, maybe 20 miles an hour and you're just riding along with gear 21, you don't have to turn your legs that many times to maintain that speed. So like that, we can understand that the pinion gear, small gear, turning a big gear, turns into torque, a lot of torque. The difference between you cranking your legs and a motor is the motor can spin 30,000, 40,000, 50,000 revolutions per minute. You cannot. So even though it's geared for torque, the pinion gear, the motor, is spinning it so fast, maybe even as few as 18,000, which is still a lot, RPM, you're going to get a lot of speed. This car goes about 25 miles an hour. That's how they were geared. But they had more torque, too, so you could take it off-road. All right. So that's going to spin this large gear. But that large gear is now spinning a smaller gear, as you can see here. So now we're going to actually reduce the gearing for a particular reason. And I'm going to show you that. So, all right. So it's really back down to pinion gear size on this. And what this is going to do is it's going to mount this gear up against this wheel here, which is a gear, and this is what houses our differential. So Let me show you that here. All right. So this only goes in one way, and I'll show you why. So if you look inside the hole here, can you see that? Let's see. There's a little piece of metal at the bottom. So it's not a complete circle. It actually locks, okay? So, and there's the same thing is on the other side. This is like a half circle. Can you see that? It's a half circle. It's not completely around. So this sits inside that, and because it locks it, it keeps this moving in sync with this other piece here. But what's inside, and this is going to be tough, this is the differential. Now you see how I spin this? And look inside between the metal and this big gear here. Can you see that there's something spinning inside? Well, that's the differential gears, and they're planetary gears is what they're called, because they rotate around a central axle like planets around the sun, okay? And when you look at the pictures, you'll see what I mean. I may take apart another RC car to get further into it, but it takes quite a bit of work to get into it, and this is the one I've taken apart today. And you know what? It's still a value, because what's unique about this is the first time I've opened up an RC car and it had a closed planetary gear setup that's riveted together that I cannot take apart. And presumably they did that so that kids wouldn't take it apart and ruin it. Because if you take apart the planetary gears, they kind of fall apart. So you could lose one, or you just might have a hard time getting it all set up, all three gears together, kind of held in place while you screwed the two pieces together, like the two metal halves. And it can be difficult, and I know that because I've done it before, and it is difficult. So that's why I think that they did that. But it's still pretty neat. This is a pretty hefty piece, and these gears are Teflon, so they're tough. Now, you know, this is a 40-year-old gear, and it's been spinning. Now, I got this, I don't know, maybe 6-7 years ago at a secondhand store, and of course, it had no remote. And you know, I feel bad for these things. I see them sitting there, and I'm like, oh, poor RC car, no one loves anymore. I'll fix it. So I get it. I have spare parts if I need. I have spare remotes, and you know, I take it and I check I get it working again. So this does work, and I will put it back together, and we will run it. So let me see. Before I do that, though, I want to show you here. Okay, so here's the motor, right? And it's kind of heavy for a little motor. And these are your positive and negative. I'm not sure which one's which. I would guess that the green is positive and the yellow is negative. But you see these little things here? Those are capacitors, okay? And that's to smooth the electrical signal out, because electricity jumps around. And if you put a capacitor on it, it smooths things out, takes away some of what's called the electrical noise, the highs and the lows, keeps the voltage more consistent, which is better for the motor. It's healthier for the motor. Sometimes on a less expensive RC vehicle, it won't have that. Sometimes it will. I've seen it both ways. So that's just a little detail there on that. And getting this apart presented a challenge I had not faced before. Whenever you're taking these things apart, you never know exactly what you're going to get. And I started to take it apart, and I was hoping I wouldn't run into a problem. I did, but I solved it way easier than I thought. So there is a suspension piece. This is the arm for the suspension. So these two pieces, okay, they mount into the chassis. This is your chassis. They slide in, and then there's two screws downward that hold this in, and the back suspension that has the wheels and it's got springs. This rotates, and here is this. See that metal piece here, and I have it clamped. Okay, so this axle here allows the back suspension piece to swivel along with the springs. And I thought, oh man, this is not, a lot of times what it is it's just a Phillips head screw, and I can unscrew it, but this is some press-on metal pieces, and actually it was not hard to take apart. I just took two of these clamp wrenches, and I clamped it tight on one side, and I clamped it tight on the other, and just spun it. See this? Okay. And I just worked it and spun it, and very easily it came apart. And that's, I might have to put it back together with a little bit of some hammering, but that's that. And then, let's see, before I stop this part. All right, so I'm going to show you here. This here is where the spring fits over. So, let me see, get one of these springs over here. Oh, here they go. All right, so here's your springs. Now, this is not oil filled or anything like that. This is simple, but it works, and that fits over the shaft there, and then you have your suspension. And so when that metal axle that I was showing you with the clamps, so that holds this plastic housing that fits in there, that has the wheels on it. Okay, your tires. So you're going to have your tires here, and then that's going to have an axle, and then that's going to spring up and down, and that's how that would work. When we put it back together, we'll see that. And these are very old tires. Here's the little nut, the wheel nut, just like a real car might have a wheel nut. And let's see, this is a fitting. This is kind of a fitting that was going on back then, 40 years ago. These tires, as I was saying, is really old. They're really old. They're 40 years old, these tires. They're a little bit hard rubber now. They were soft and gummy at one time, but now they're a little, dry, and they could crack and dry rot if you're too rough with them. But they still have some, hear that, semi-pneumatic capability to them. There's little air holes in there that let the air out, and that's what you're hearing. Like that. So they're still effective, and these knobby tires are really great off-road. But let's see. I think there was one more thing I wanted to go over. Now, let's see. The wheel fits on here. Oh, yes. Okay, so that fitting. So the back of that wheel, see that? See those little circles, the 5 circles? They fit. They slide on, and then they fit and wedge themselves on here, and so that holds the wheel, so it spins the axle. So when the axle spins, it spins this, and then what holds this onto the metal shaft so it stays in place, right? So like, how do you get plastic to stay in place? So let's see if I can, here we go. Yes, it came right apart. So that comes off, and here's the thing. Sometimes a wheel will have a different kind of solution for how it holds itself on, and you can change it, and then you can change the wheels. So let's say it doesn't have the 5 little spokes that fit in here. It might have just one 6-sided nut that you can fit on this metal shaft, and then you can put a different tire, a different wheel on it, a bigger tire or wheel, both. And now, you see this little metal shaft here? This is what you don't want to lose. So right here is a Teflon spinning piece here, okay? That's your, oh gosh, what's the name of it? I know the word. It's a Teflon bearing right in there, right? So there's your Teflon bearing, and then this little metal shaft that slides in and out, which you don't want to lose, is what locks this plastic wheel. I don't know what you call that thing, but this is what holds the wheel onto the axle. And you see the metal shaft, the little metal shaft, fits right in there. And so that allows, you see how that little metal shaft would fit lengthwise, right? So there's a little hole that goes through the metal axle, and then this slides on, and then you have to press it on. You don't want to lose that metal thing. But with some effort, looks like on this one, you press it on. All right, this is going to be, there we go. You press that on, and then you spin it. You try to get it so that little metal piece fits inside, and so they fit together. There we go. And so now the axle will spin this. Okay, so just a little detail. So if you're ever taking one of these apart, you want to take it apart vertically, because it's going to have one of those little metal pieces, and if you lose it, it's very easy to lose. And if you don't have extra, which you probably won't, now you can't play with the car. You really need to have that in order for the wheel to spin. So just be careful when you're taking it apart. All right, so we're going to put this back together, and then we'll get back to some broader things that we're going to see with this RC class here. All right, so the Super Lobo has been put back together, and let me go over this car with you. All right, so it has front independent suspension. It has the metal steering rods here. It has these kind of, wagon wheel type wheels, but these are really good for tight turns. This car can really cut tight turns, and you're going to see that. It has, your front bumper. It's flexible. Now remember, this is 40 years old, so plastic has done quite well. Here's one of those metal pins you can pull out and pull this off, but there's nothing underneath it. I assume that one time maybe you could change the color of that or something, but it's not the electronics or anything underneath there. In the back, you have your rear suspension. It's not independent. You can see the motor here, and then it doesn't have a heat sink or anything, but they probably one of the reasons is the batteries when this came out in 1983 were nickel cadmium. They were probably at the most 1200 milliamps, so they wouldn't run that long. So the car would probably run out of power in about 8 to 10 minutes, so the motor really wouldn't heat up that much. Here you have the differential process of when you turn the one wheel, the other wheel goes in the opposite direction. If you turn both at the same time, it engages the pinion gear that I showed you when I opened it. So I think you can hear that. And so you're turning the transmission and the gearing that goes to the motor when you turn both at the same time. Is your on-off switch is up on top here. And if you turn the car over, this is a little bit unique than some of the cars we've seen. So the car runs on one of those big 7.2 volt batteries, and this is a 3300 amp hour. So, you might not be able to run this car, it's 3 times as powerful as the batteries that were out when this car was made. So you probably should stop the car from running every 10 minutes and let it cool off. Now the battery goes only to the motor, so it's dedicated to just running the motor. So all that power is going to go to the motor. So it has a lot of power. And these batteries here just do the steering. Now when I got this car, it was used, so it did not have a remote. And, I figured I'd have a remote that works for it. I do, but it's a little awkward. Now this is a channel 4. Actually, I'll show you here. They have under the battery here, there's a sticker that it's yellow, and they're color coded. So channel 4 is yellow. It's 27 megahertz, but it's not only 27 megahertz. It's let's see if I wrote down the frequency. Sometimes I write down the frequencies. Oh, actually, it says it here, and I'll give you an idea, because the yellow, when you have yellow on your remote, it's also channel 4. So let me look at this here. So channel 4 is actually 27.145 megahertz. And you can compare that like with channel 3 is 27.095, or channel 5 is 27.195. So, they're half a megahertz away, each one of these frequencies, and there's 6 bands. So that way you could race against each other, but you'd have to have different crystals. So there's crystals that determine the frequencies, and the car comes with a crystal that is usually soldered in to for the electronics. But the remote, you can change the crystal. So here's what a crystal looks like. So what it used to be is that the car, if it had a removable crystal, and sometimes they did, you could pull the crystal out of the car, and you could get a set. You'd get a transmitter. See, TX is for transmit, and then the car would have one that was RX for receive. And so you'd put your transmit crystal here. You can't swap them. Transmit, it's a different frequency to transmit, slightly different. So you'd have to have your transmit frequency in your remote and your receive frequency, channel 4, for example, with this car, channel 4 for both transmit and receive. Now, this is the remote that I use for this car, which also works for something I have that's the Extreme machine. And this is Tyco RC. Tyco was another company, not as big as Nikko, not as popular as far as RC, but they were popular for making really crazy, wild, stunt kind of vehicles back in the day. And, I've had this remote. Oh, God, this remote's like 35 years old probably. And see, you have the yellow tab on there. You can grab that and pull that out, and then that would pull the crystal out. But I try not to do it too often, because if it breaks, then it's, it's like a heavy paper, and it can rip, and then, it's a pain to get it out after. Now, the thing is that this remote is supposed to be, this is your accelerate, this is, forward and reverse, and this is your turning right and left, but it's switched on this car. I'd have to go in and I'd have to either change the wiring on the remote, which I've done before, or I change it on the car. You can actually take this module, take it out, flip it, and put it here, and then put this one there. But I'm not going to do that because it does work for another vehicle. So I just have to get adept at using this as the accelerator, forward and reverse, and this is your left and your right. So I just kind of hold the remote cockeyed, and then I, adjust my brain to be able to do it. It has a big long antenna because, once again, it's that lower frequency. But here's something kind of neat. This does not run on AA's. It runs on a battery pack. So you can plug in a 9.6 volt battery pack into your remote, and it did come with a like a plastic adapter that you could put 8 AA's in, and you could run it on 8 AA's or just a battery pack, which is sometimes more convenient because now you have a rechargeable battery, so you don't have to, run out of batteries like, you put your AA's in and they die and you throw them out. But this way you can just, if you had an extra 9.6 volt battery pack, you can put it in here, and then you can use that battery pack also for RC cars. So here you go. This is, your rehab of a 40-year-old, that's really tight to get in there, 40-year-old radio-controlled Super Lobo, who cares? We can do that later. Super Lobo RC car, and I am going to show you how that runs. So, you kind of got to take this and you push that in. And see, and that's supposed to go easily. And there we go, and now it cooperates. So, all right, and I'm going to show you it running.